It's a good day to fight, and today we will be discussing democracy, or rather how democracy is twisted to be suitable for certain groups of people. One of the most frequent ways or methods to twist or to distort the nature of democracy is to present it as a regime of procedures and formalities. This is very handy for those groups having enough resources to control and influence those procedures. The problem is that formalities were never a soul or the expression of the true nature of democracy, and they were never a good measurement of it. Even elections aren't the foundation of democracy, even though we are told so every day. Why do they repeat this? Because this is a very handy situation for them when people believe that just having more or less honest elections means that everything is okay with our democracy. Sir Winston Churchill, in his famous speech in 1947, which had that famous quote about democracy, which sounds as, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all of the other forms that have been tried from time to time." So, in the same speech, he actually added some other valuable remarks on democracy and its nature. He said, "Democracy is not a caucus obtaining a fixed terms of office by promises and then doing what it likes with the people. We hold that there ought to be a constant relationship between the rulers and the people. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, still remains the sovereign definition of democracy." And then he added, "Democracy, I must explain to the Lord President, doesn't mean we have got our majority, never mind how, and we have our lease of office for 5 years, so what are you going to do about it? That's not democracy. That's only small party patter, which will not go down with the mass of people of this country. But it's not Parliament that should rule. It's the people who should rule through Parliament. All this idea of a handful of men getting hold of the state machine, having the right to make the people do what suits their party and personal interests or doctrines, is completely contrary to every conception of surviving Western democracy." Quote ends. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Sir Winston Churchill, but I have to admit this was spot-on remarks. We could say that even delivering on some promises that were put in a party program is not the true essence of democracy. The essence is the rule of the people, of the nation. But if we would move away from copy-pasted constitutions and trite, worn-out phrases, we will see that the rule of the people requires a lot more than having parliament or senate, president, etc. And I would certainly refrain from using words as representations, because we are hardly represented anywhere anyway. We just have some sort of governing body legitimized through elections. Anyway, the actual rule of people, or self-governing, requires a lot more than that. It requires certain qualities distributed among population. It requires information and methods to influence the way country is heading, and not just once in 4 or 5 years, but on a regular basis. For democracy to work, we would need a live and energized process, which would certainly disregard some armchair concerns on equality or multiculturalism. Democracy requires a strict selection. It demands better human material. The more rights, the more responsibilities, the more selection there is. This is the inner logic of democracy, logic which prevents democracy from self-destruction, prevents it from degeneration. This is the logic which you get when you throw away lies about soul and utmost importance of elections or party system. What do we get instead of this, instead of following the inner logic? We get total formalization of processes while ignoring the most important thing, the state of people who are supposed to rule certain land, while ignoring conditions which are necessary for these people to be properly raised and educated to be able to rule. Egalitarianization, making everyone equally bad, and liberalization of democracy are giving to current so-called elites even more power and ways to buy votes or to manipulate voters. And we have all those talks about further decrease of voting age or giving more voting rights to migrants, which will just widen the field for potential manipulations. The more equal degenerates you can put into formal democratic process, the less influence will have those people who still remember what was the essence of democracy. The easier it will be to shut them up. The groups of active and loud non-government organizations are trying to portray themselves as the real spirit of democracy or the very nature of democratic processes, but in the most cases they are just professional activists who have nothing to do with people and who answer only to their sponsors. In no way they reflect ability of a common man to influence his country. Establishment is becoming so rigid and isolated in its current form of a state within the state that it has no problems with labeling half of the population as fascists or deplorables. Shut down this, stop financing him, silence those, this one is racist, that one is extremist. Where is the rule of people in it? This is just a game of a semi-closed private clubs, hiding behind some formalized pseudo-democratic procedures. Media is only concerned on how to explain why certain views should not be represented in government. And obviously they are not doing it on the basis of identifying infantile opinions of dependent classes whose views could lead to tyranny or economic collapse. No, they are just filtering on the basis of ideology. Masses of dependent or even mentally unstable people are portrayed as beacons of democracy, while people advocating for common sense are labeled as archaic savages and threats. In certain way, profanation of democracy suits too many different people. It suits degenerate groups, dependent parasites, it suits neo-Marxists, it suits the whole bunch of different bureaucrats, partocrats and politicians sucking wealth and power through this system. This is why we're never gonna see any significant discussion of this type. So we have degradation of democracy into controlled and manipulated set of formal procedures, when crowds of dependent degenerates are selling legitimation to isolated political classes for some welfare bonuses. And situation like this is highly dangerous even without any ideological subversion. It just creates a very hostile atmosphere where healthy and independent people with common sense are aggressively attacked and ostracized by this alliance of ruling pseudo-elites and their minions. Add to these openly hostile and subversive ideological groups of radical left, and you will see that democracy can only be saved by radical measures going far outside common democratic procedures. So to summarize, we're starting to forget that democracy in its inner logic is one of the most demanding systems out there. It is a system that actively demands that everyone participating in a governing process would become even more responsible, independent, strong and resolute. Democracy hates cultural liberalism. Democracy hates masses of weak degenerates. It might be not what you heard about democracy from mainstream media, but it is certainly what democratic logic dictates to preserve this system functions. Cultural liberalism tells you that you can be as pathetic as you want, you still have all the rights. Democracy demands more and more from you, and it demands brutal selection and cleansing of voter base in order to operate with efficiency and to avoid degenerating into ochlocracy, the rule of the mob, usually the controlled by someone mob. If you lack in quality department, you will never be able to have truly democratic society. In feudalism, it can be compensated by aristocratic classes taking most important roles. In absolute monarchy, it can be compensated by careful selection of administrators. But there is no way to compensate for losing quality material in democracy, because quality human material is just essential for this system. You fight for equality or you lose everything. Therefore, if you see a politician claiming to be democratic, but never addressing the state of people, never addressing issue of raising proper responsible rulers, then you know that this is not a democratic politician. It's just another fan of procedures, which gives him legitimation and power to rule over dependent herd. True democratic politician will be concerned about the shape of people of particular country. He will be concerned whether they are independent enough to make proper decisions, whether they are informed enough, whether they are brave enough to face challenges and take responsibility. Real democrat always thinks about human material first and procedures and formalities second. Real democrat never praises equality as it's not making democracy any stronger. He never makes rights unconditional, but rather makes them bound to cultural and religious standards and norms. Distributing rights for him means distributing even more responsibilities. Making country democratic means making majority of people self-sufficient, strong and culturally united, as disloyal or weak population will destroy democracy or will degenerate into autocracy very fast. Do you see many politicians like this? Probably not. Do you still hear about democracy on every corner? Probably yes. This is how you know that definition of democracy was twisted and distorted, and its initial spirit and nature were buried under meaningless procedures which do not stop democracy from degeneration and serve only to certain groups of people and their interests. That's it, friends. Leave your comments below on whether democracy can be redeemed and rebuilt properly or not. Help spread the word about this channel, subscribe, and have a nice day.